My name is Lars Dahle. I'm Lausanne Catalyst for Media Engagement and also member of the steering committee of the European Leadership Forum. And right now I'm privileged to have General Secretary Oyvind Asland from Norwegian Lutheran Mission with us. Welcome to this conversation. And Oyvind, Norwegian Lutheran Mission. Can you describe that in a minute or two? What is that?
It's not very easy to describe in a minute or two, but it's an organization that was started in 1891. So we just had our 125th anniversary. Started with the intention of bringing the gospel to China, inspired by Hudson Taylor and those...
And China Inland Mission and that whole revival of China Mission.
There was a revival and it came to Norway, and the thing was that 12 million Chinese people are dying every year without having had the knowledge of Christ or having had the chance to hear the gospel. So that was how it was started, and it has grown, and it's, well, by Norwegian standards, quite big organization now with a strong home office. We are more or less like a denomination back in Norway, Lutheran denomination with several congregations spread throughout the country. Mission in 15 different countries in the world. We run quite a lot of schools, and parts of our ministry is a very vibrant and strong ministry still.
Well, that was a lot in 2 minutes. Thank you. You're talking about this burning passion for the gospel from the beginning, and that has been a hallmark, hasn't it, of NLM throughout the years? This passion for gospel, for the gospel of Christ reaching out,
and it's still what we hope can be our passion, our vision, and what is carrying us, the burden to reach the unreached people groups in the world. Some of them are coming to Norway also, lots of new opportunities. And as we started engaged with overseas mission, going to China, the ministry in Norway grew tremendously, and maybe even unintentionally. And this is also our passion, to reach new generations in Norway with the gospel.
I seem to recall that the logo of NLM is like a globe and a cross. Is that right? Yeah. And could that be, said to be signify the heart of the movement and the organization?
Absolutely. And if you look at the organization now, it's a quite diverse organization with lots of activities, lots of properties, lots of schools and different things, and my aim and my task is to try and keep reminding us what's our main objective.
Reminding of the heart of the organization.
Why it all started, and what should always be in our heart to reach people with the message of the cross.
As the General Secretary of NLM, you carry a lot of responsibility. How do you live with that?
That's a huge question also. I'm totally dependent on, well, first of all, my wife, and then lots of good co-workers. In Norway, I guess in Europe, some decades ago, I think being a leader of an organization like that was more like a one-man show. Everything was laid upon the shoulders of the leader, and I try to do it more like we're doing it
like
together.
A teamwork. Like a team. Yeah. For how long have you been a General Secretary now?
It's 8 years now.
8 years, yes.
10, yeah.
And throughout these 8 years, you have observed the organization and the context, both in Norway and in the global context, and you observed the need for some changes.
Yeah.
What were the things you were observing?
Well, first of all, I served in East Africa, in Kenya, for some years.
As a missionary?
As a missionary, doing church planting in Muslim context. And I came back to our head office in 2005. And I was really eager to bring about change, because I saw that to a great extent our ministry was in already established areas where the gospel were known, where churches were functioning. And
Are you talking about the international, the global work?
Mostly in East Africa, which was my responsibility at the time when I returned to Norway after 8 years in Kenya. And I was really eager. It was obvious to me that we need to change. We need to put more resources into reaching the unreached, those who have never had a chance to hear the gospel, while we are using most of our resources in already established areas with vibrant churches and so on. So I was looking upon myself as a change maker when I came to the head office. And
did it turn out that way?
Yeah, we made some changes. And some of
were these changes controversial? Were they easy? Were they tough?
They were quite tough and controversial. I think being a leader, one of the burdens of being a leader is that you should be, and you often are ahead of people when it comes to think about changes and are we aligned with our vision? Are we doing what we should do? That should be the questions that a leader is asking him or herself all the time. And then you will always be ahead of the rest of the people in the organization. So the things that are obvious to me or to you as a leader is not that obvious to other people. So that's one of the burdens.
And one of the tensions?
Oh, yes. So I got into lots of trouble and challenges.
Yeah. But if you should briefly describe in terms of the global work of NLM, what has been the major changes that has been brought forth or brought into place?
The major changes in the international ministry is one, that we have started to focus our resources into the least reached areas, and that's a continuity with our past. Because why did we go to China? Because 12 million Chinese died every year without having had the chance to hear the gospel. And that's the places we are going to use our resources today also, in my opinion, to keep with our tradition and our vision and our heart for reaching the unreached. So that's one major change that we have been doing last 10, 20 years or so.
So this means moving on, is that right?
Yeah. Moving on, like in East Africa, we do not have missionaries, almost, with a few exceptions, in the traditional areas where we have been serving for decades. Now we have moved into other areas, also in East Africa, but with unreached people groups. And that's all over the world where we are serving. We're trying to do the same, so that at least 60% of our resources should be spent in areas with unreached people groups.
So the word unreached is very central to NLM's calling.
Or the least reached.
Least reached, yes. Yeah. There was another parallel concept coming up recently in related to the Cape Town Congress. That was the word unengaged. Mm-hmm. Would you like to comment on NLM in relationship to unreached and unengaged?
We do not focus too much on the unengaged, but from where we have been traditionally, we try to evaluate the situation and see where can we quite easily move into new areas with the least reached, that is below 2% Christians, and without people coming in from the outside, no chance, humanly speaking, for the gospel to spread within a people group. So that's what we are trying to focusing on.
And this is happening in a context, wider context, where then the Christian church, and not the least the evangelical church, is growing very fast in the global south.
Oh yes, and that's one of the other changes that has happened, that we are really dependent on the people. We used to serve them with the gospel some 50, 100 years ago. Now we need them more than they need us. and we are really eager to see how we can relate to them, cooperate with them, and how we together can go to new areas.
So we're talking about forming partnerships between North and South in this context? Maybe South and South as well?
Oh yes. All kinds of partnerships are needed these days, I think, to reach. There are still some 3 billion people in the world belonging to people groups with no access to the gospel. So there's still a huge challenge ahead of us. And we really see that we are totally dependent on the vibrant churches in the global South.
And being a mission organization, evangelical mission organizations with a fairly long history now, and being in such a context, are there challenges involved in relating to partner churches when one is moving, from traditional work to new work? How has that been your experience?
There has been some challenges, but lately we have really been working very well together. We are meeting regularly to discuss how can we work even better together, and how can our partnership be beneficial to those who have not yet heard the gospel. Instead of thinking my own organization or the church leaders in the South thinking of their own church, we are trying to
say... So everything is kingdom work, everything belongs to God, that's what you're saying. Yeah. So you mentioned moving on from established work to reaching the least reached, and the partnership between South and North, global North and global South, as two of the key areas. Are there any other areas you would like to highlight in terms of changes?
Well, then on the national scene in Norway, we have really needed to do some changes in the way we work.
Could you describe how NLM traditionally has worked? It's a specific context of the Nordic and Germany and Nordic countries, isn't it? With so-called prayer house movements. Yeah. How did that work historically?
Well, in the Scandinavian Nordic countries, we've had the Lutheran state church, which has been, the church has been run by the state, which sounds funny today, and it's no longer the fact in our Nordic countries. The ties.
Maybe to put it mildly, a mixed blessing.
Yeah, a blessing to some extent, but a very mixed one. The situation in the Nordic countries is that the Lutheran Church, which is still the majority church in Norway, 70% of the population are members of the Lutheran majority church. But we have seen the need to distance ourselves from the church because of a very liberal theological development within the church. So we used to work together, the state church and the prayer house movement, which was a revival movement consisting of other organizations like us, having our spiritual meetings, prayer meetings at the prayer houses, but also going to the church. So
church meaning the established church.
The established church. This has dramatically changed the last 10 years or so.
So one factor here is the factor of the theology of the established church being changed from maybe, you're saying evangelical theology being maybe a majority position to liberal theology becoming a majority. Is that right?
I think that's how you can put it, yeah. Of course, throughout history, the Lutheran Church has been through lots of changes, and we have had liberal movements within the church before also, but there is a new situation now where the so-called liberal theology is getting stronger, and the same-sex marriage issue, for example, is showing us that this is really something that is dominating the majority, the established church.
So you would look at the same-sex issue as an indicator of the theological developments?
Yeah. Going away from the biblical truth, from thinking of the Bible as the truth revealed from God.
So in this context of continuing global international mission and the changing context globally, but also changing context at home, what have been the changes in Norway, the primary changes?
In Norway as a society?
Sorry, in the Norwegian Lutheran Mission, responding to what's happening in Norway.
Church planting.
Church planting, yes.
That's what we have been doing the last.
Is that almost for some people like a contradiction in terms of prayer house movement moving into church planting?
Yeah, absolutely. But in my opinion, it's not. It's very natural for us to do it because
you need to expand on that.
We are a quite pragmatic organization with an evangelical, I would say, low church view on things. And what's been going on in the prayer houses for all those years, I will say this is church, what we've been doing there.
So from a theological point of view, it's actually a church happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even though it hasn't been organized formally as a church, that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. But still, many people has viewed it as their church, their only spiritual home, so to speak, but they have formally been members of the state church, but still they've had their spiritual home at the prayer house. So what we are doing now is, in my view, just a continuation of this. And another aspect is that young people, they are not longer interested in being in the established former state church on Sunday and having other activities at the prayer houses during weekdays. So both theologically, because of the development in the church, and sociologically, because of the young people, they need to belong one place, and they really want to have a place to belong where they can have spiritually sound teaching and really belong with their families.
And then with the families coming along, I suppose it's also about catering for their needs in the wider sense, like baptisms and maybe funerals. Is that also part of this process?
That's a part of the deal, part of the package that comes with it. And that's maybe some of the things that have been quite controversial in our movement, because we want to be a movement, and we still want to have the focus on the least reached people groups of the world. And some people fear that when we become a church more clearly, that we are going to use too much resources on doing that instead of going out.
So then it's your task then as a General Secretary, I suppose, to try to keep the movement together, focused, as you talked about earlier, about the heart of the passion. Has that been a very difficult task, with thinking now about the changes in Norway primarily?
It's been a quite difficult task, but it's also been a blessed task, and seeing how some of the churches we have planted have grown, how they are still very mission focused. It's really a blessing to see, and also trying to help older people to see that this is really okay. Things are changing, and we are changing. But it's really also a continuation of what we have always been doing with the same heart the same vision, but we just have to do it differently these days if we are going to stay true to our calling.
So what you're saying is that in order to stay true to one's calling, one needs to change.
Yeah. I would put it even stronger and say, in order to communicate the gospel today, we need to change. If we are not changing, people will not be able to relate to us. They will not be able to understand what we are saying, and we will become irrelevant. So change is absolutely necessary.
And as a General Secretary, it has been your key role then to lead change. And so far, in our conversation, we have focused on the global aspects and the at-home aspects in Norway about what kind of change were needed. But if we sort of transfer into a new phase of our conversation, as a leader, leading in change, is this something that gives you energy, or does it zap energy from you?
Mostly, I will say it gives energy. But we have had some really hard battles through the years and some conflicts. And of course, they can drain a lot of energy from me. But mostly, and again, because of good co-workers, good co-leaders, we have been able to ride through it and to gain energy and blessing from it.
So when do you think a leader can discern, or how can a leader discern when it's healthy and necessary to establish change, to implement change?
I think that's one of the main tasks of a leader, to be able to discern and to constantly look for ways of improving, staying true to our calling, and implementing change. So it's absolutely crucial for a leader to
Do you think leaders are trained to do that today?
No, I don't think so.
Can we be trained? Can we be trained, or is it by learning from more senior leaders, for example, or how do we do this, or how should we do it?
I think we should focus much more on the need for change, for contextualization in our seminaries, in our theological training, and being trained as a missionary, as a pastor. This should really be a big part of it, because it's in the Bible. I mean, it's amazing when you start to look at this from a biblical point of view and reflect upon it theologically, that, wow, this is, I mean.
And you mentioned contextualization, and one of the standard definitions on contextualization is talking about that the gospel and our approaches need to be both authentic and relevant. Is this part of the whole thing?
Yeah. Like I said, continuity and change. That's another way of putting it, I think. And it's been in my head ever since I started as a General Secretary, continuity and change. We need both. And I constantly ask myself, is this something we should continue doing? Or is this something we should stop doing? Or do we need to make some changes here? So I think it's a crucial part of being a leader.
But as you said, leading is definitely not a one-man show. It's a teamwork. Has it been difficult to get people on board with the kind of changes we are talking about, whether in relationship to the global, international work of NLM or the work at home?
In my experience, it's been quite easy to get the key leaders on board. But then most of us resist change.
Do you even resist change?
Yeah, I do. I mean, if things are, at least if the changes are big enough and affecting me enough.
Personally, or
Yeah. And I think it's natural for most people to resist change.
And I suppose as a leader, there's a balance that has to be kept, I would imagine, between, getting people on board with arguments, with sound persuasion, or manipulation even. And I suppose there are temptations involved in the leadership task.
Yes. Yeah, it's very easy to become manipulative when you're trying to bring about change. It's one of the great dangers, I would say.
So how can a leader be aware of those temptations? And what do you think, what would be your advice based on your own experience and I suppose both successes and failures as with every leader?
I think it's really important to show people respect. And Paul says several places, the Apostle Paul, that we are not, this is not magic. We are not trying to bring you on board with tricks or we are just presenting what we find is the truth to you in an open way, and then people will have to.
This reminds me of a key passage in 2 Corinthians 4, I think. Yeah, and as you say, with being concerned about one's own motives and methods.
Yeah.
That's what you are saying.
To be healthy and sound spiritually is really important, because of course I could have told the people that I'm trying to lead that God has told me that this is what we have to do. Lots of Christian leaders do that, but I think it's a really dangerous path.
And there might even be theological objections to that, I imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's a temptation, and when you really need change, and it's obvious to you that we need to do these changes in order to reach people, in order to stay alive as a movement, then it's easy to
resort to
manipulation instead of sound arguments and being patient. I mean, that's one of maybe the major lessons I've learned, that it takes time.
Have there been contexts, the situation where you have had to go before God silently and say, did I overstep a line now?
Oh yes, oh yes. I'm not a very patient person, so I've been doing that lots of time and had trying to reconcile with people, and one of the things that have been important to me the last couple of years is to show thankfulness and appreciation. Because lots of people, they don't only fear or resist change, but they feel that the need for change is because we have failed. So immediately when you start talking about change, they will feel threatened. And that you are accusing them.
Not appreciated.
Yeah. So that's really important to me.
So does that relate to a perspective where there are different phases in the mission work, where one way of doing things or an approach or a way of organizing or whatever is very appropriate in one area, one phase, but not necessarily as appropriate 2 phases down.
Exactly. So that's what we have to learn. And several of the people I meet who feel threatened and by this, I mean, I really admire them. And they have stayed true to their calling, and God has done great things through them. And then it's to just acknowledge that, and at the other hand say that still there's time for change now. I hope you will join us, and I hope that you can somehow change your mindset and come on board and work with us in a slightly new way.
It's interesting you mentioned this is something that has become increasingly, if I understood you correctly, increasingly important to you. And you mentioned 2 or 3 last years has been more on the agenda, it seems. So has that been part of learning from the change process?
Absolutely. I have unintentionally communicated to lots of people that what you have been doing is worthless. That's not what I have tried to say, but that's what people have heard. So this has become important to me the last.
I suppose that this is the challenge of communication. The point is not what is being said, but what is being heard. Someone said.
And me being impatient, being eager, it's obvious that we need change. It's really easy to communicate something totally different from what you intended.
As someone, you described yourself as someone who felt a calling to be a change agent, still keeping the continuity into the equation. Does that also imply creating a culture of change within the organization?
Yeah, I think that's crucial also. I've said that about a lot of things now, that it's crucial and really important, but you need, I mean, the culture in a movement is really important. I mean, we have mission statements and we have visions and core values and everything, and it's important and it's something that we are working on. But it's the culture in the organization that is important. How are we describing ourselves? How do we look upon ourselves? How do we relate to one another? And I've been really blessed, like I said, with some key leaders that I've been working with who have shared my vision and who have seen the same need for change as me. And I think that slowly we have been able to create a kind of culture that is at least open to change and is also looking for ways to change in order to, again, stay true to our calling and to fulfill our mission.
So in order to be contextually appropriate, one has to be willing to change.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so.
We live in a culture which is very fluid, especially in the Western context, and there is also a pressure in many contexts towards changing the content and the theology. So what are your reflections on that? How to keep changing in a healthy way without changing in an unhealthy way theologically?
Yeah, like I said, I think change is necessary in order to preserve the content of our message, and I don't want in any way to change the content. Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, only way of salvation. Bible as God's authoritative word to us today. This is what I want to preserve and to stay faithful to. But in order to do that, I think that change is necessary in the way we are doing things, organizing ourselves, talking to people. But many people in my organization, which is a quite conservative organization, many of them fear that when you talk about change, will you not automatically change the message? And of course, there's a danger. And in our fluid context, as you say, you can easily do that. So it's really something to be aware of, and that's why we have to work really hard theologically to make sure that this is not happening.
So there is a need to do theological, missiological work on this whole area. Is that what you are proposing?
Absolutely, I think so.
So what will be the contours of such a theological task, do you think?
It's a huge task, and it's been done for decades, of course. But in my specific context in Norway, I think the changes we see in the majority church and the established church is that they are changing the context, but not so much they are changing the content and not so much the context. They stay true to some traditions when it comes to liturgy, when it comes to all these things, but they are changing the content, and deliberately so also. And we really need to do more theological work in the, you love John Stott, in the Stott tradition, to read our context and to read Scripture and to see how in our time this can be put together in a good way.
And you mentioned John Stott, and he phrased it as double listening, didn't he? And listening to the Word and the world. And I think that maybe is a good summary of what we have been talking about. How to, yes, how to be true to the biblical message, the Word, and at the same time how to be sensitive in an appropriate way, culturally, where we are called to serve. Is there anything else on your mind that you would like to share before we wrap it all up in terms of leading change and the challenges for leaders in terms of it?
Yeah, I think it's about seeing opportunities where God is opening doors. I mean, the way Europe is changing, the way the Nordic countries are changing these days, it gives us enormous opportunities. And seeing them, grasping the opportunities, creating change, it's a wonderful ministry. So I hope that many people will join me and receive the blessings of all the opportunities and the changes that are coming our way.
Thanks for sharing with us, Øyvind. We do appreciate that, and we wish you God's blessing in your important role as the General Secretary of Norwegian Lutheran Mission, and we thank you for your time and for spending time with us in sharing what it means to lead change. Thank you.
Thank you very much.